Judicial Populism and Competing Narratives of Authority. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker from Hungary, Professor Mátyás Bencze, who will be talking on how can courts be populist. I'll hand over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Could you share my slides
All
with
right,
the audience, or should I do that?
Yes, you can.
If you want to share your slides, and you'll have control over them as well.
Okay, I'm trying it.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Where is the option to share the screen?
Yes, you already the focus.
Okay, I see. Yes. Share screen. Sorry. Please give me one moment. Something went wrong. You see my slides? No.
Different file that you. Yeah, I see.
And you see the slides moving?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for inviting me for this great conference. This conference is a very topical one. As you can see, the title of my presentation a little bit different from the title I sent you, but this is an important aspect of the judicial populism. And so I have to say that this conference is very, very timely because it is 6 a.m. Here now, and many Hungarians, including myself, are preparing for a huge demonstration against the authoritarian populist Hungarian government. Okay, so I have been conducting research on judicial populism for 10 years, and I focused mostly on these questions you can see in the slide, because I consider them the most important ones. But now, in this presentation, I will focus only on the last question. What are the causes of judicial populism? Because it is the aspect of the topic that I found the most under-researched. It seems to me that there is a tacit consensus that judicial populism is somehow the consequence or corollary of political populism. So there is a direct link between political populism and judicial populism. However, I would like to argue here that there are factors other than political populism which contributing to the spread of judicial populism. Thank you very much for the concept paper. It was very useful for me because I fully agree with the authors of the paper that we must distinguish between the so-called bureaucratic populism from the populism of elected politicians and political leaders. So my research focuses primarily on populism of the Hungarian courts, and the framework you provided helped me to categorize Hungarian judicial populism amongst the different manifestation of bureaucratic populism. So the term bureaucratic populism is very good because it helps us to distinguish the political populism with the populism of other non-elected political organs. So, of course, the judicial populism in Hungary is a form of the bureaucratic judicial populism, and it is also endogenous because the ordinary courts, I'm talking about ordinary courts, not the constitutional court of Hungary, only the ordinary courts. So the ordinary courts have not yet been captured by the authoritarian government. You wrote in the consent paper that Hungarian state institutions are captured by the populist government. Is not fully true when it comes to the ordinary courts. For example, 6 months ago, Hungarian judges held a huge demonstration in favor of judicial independence. So it indicates that the ordinary judiciary has not been captured by the government. And you also make a distinction between proper and guardian authoritarian logic of bureaucratic populism. And I have to say that as Hungarian courts do not have their own political agenda, unlike the Supreme Court of Pakistan, for example. So they do not have their own political agenda. The aim of their populist adjudication is to preserve or strengthen their institutional legitimacy. And I would like to talk about that effort of Hungarian courts. Moving to the next slide. So in my research, I make a distinction between the preconditions and causes of judicial populism, and this slide shows that there are some preconditions that facilitate the spread of judicial populism, both in Hungary or in a global scale. And more importantly, there are some factors that incentivize judges to behave in a populist manner. So these are the causes of the judicial populism. The first in the list, the first item in the list is the democratic decline. So if judges see that politicians behave in a populist manner, that can be an incentive to copy that kind of behavior because it proves to be successful. And the second is the decline of the so-called mediating institutions. We know that political populism is much against mediating institutions. They prefer the direct connection between the people and the leader, the heroic leader. The third one is we know that judges do not operate in a vacuum. They're part of a legal complex, and if lawyers, attorneys, or prosecutors tend to behave in a populist manner, it can be there can be a pressure on courts to do so. We have many examples from Hungary when the prosecutor or the lawyer was a populist, used populist rhetoric, and it had an impact on the court decision. And From a theoretical aspect, the most interesting development, as Habermas in 20 published a book in 2023, he rewrote his classic book, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere. This is new structural transformation of the public sphere. So in my penultimate slide, I focus on this new structural transformation of the public sphere. I'm conducting research mostly amongst Hungarian judges, but I think my results can be generalized. Okay. So I'm talking about the new type of legitimacy the courts have to achieve. In the 60s of the last century, Guy Debord, the philosopher, published his book on the society of the spectacle, and he commented it in 1988. And this book is a well-known criticism of the capitalism. He criticized the condition where the market logic colonizes the whole society. And what we can see now is we can say that it is Debord vision on steroids. I'm talking about, of course, the so-called attention economy or digital capitalism. And we are the witnesses nowadays that the so-called entertainment industry has consumed the serious expertise-based politics. I can mention here the performance of Donald Trump, but there are other populist leaders who use the logic of the entertainment industries. They can rule the moment. They act in a very spectacular way. And so in our age, there is a competition for the attention of the people, or attention of the consumers. But the question is why courts take part in this competition? Why they feel being incentivized to take part in this competition. So here are the reasons. On the one side, we are witnesses of the drastic drop in the number of the court cases, as well as the decline of the expert and, of course, legal professional authority, let alone the challenges posed by the AI to substitute human judges, for example. So all these factors threaten to diminish the importance of the courts. So they need a strategic response to these challenges. And the other side, there is increased media coverage of court cases. And this media coverage brings the more sensational or spectacular aspects of court cases to the fore, to the public. And so, in my view, judicial populism indicates that courts has to adopt the logic of the entertainment industry to strengthen their significance and legitimacy. So the pure legitimacy based on pure professional knowledge, professional expertise, it's not simply not enough in our time. They have to sell themselves, and so the manifestation, if this reaction is a judicial populism. So, judicial populism can take many forms. In my previous works, I made a distinction between rhetorical judicial populism, when the language of the courts are populist. They can speak in the style of the tabloids. The other version of judicial populism is decisional judicial populism, when courts adjusted the decision to the public mood. So there are some examples of decisional judicial populism and rhetorical judicial populism from the practice of Hungarian courts, but unfortunately, I do not have time to talk about these examples. But as we social scientists and legal scholars, unfortunately, also part of the attention economy, I would like to pay your attention to a new book, Judging and Judiciary, in which I wrote a chapter about judicial populism, and you can find many scandalous and spectacular examples of judicial populism. So thank you very much for your attention. I end here.
Thank you very much, Professor Bencze. We will have our next speaker, and we'll take some questions, if that's okay, towards the end when we've heard from the other speakers. So our next speaker is Elliot Dolan-Evans, lecturer in law at Monash University, who is going to talk on judging the state of exception, the judiciary in the Israeli populist project. Do you have some slides, or is this we don't want to start the
That's all.
I think you have to get rid of this. So remind me later. Yeah. This one, that one, that's it. Fine. Very good. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for having me this afternoon. I feel very honoured also to go after Professor Mátyás, and the new book looks excellent as well, Judging in the Judiciary. I'll certainly look out for it. My name's Elliot, as was mentioned. I'm a lecturer in law at Monash and RMIT. I primarily teach in public law and international law, and I'm also an early career researcher, graduating a few years ago from my PhD, which was looking at the political economy of peace building. So what I wanted to do this afternoon was have a look at the judiciary in a different sense that Professor Mátyás was looking at, and take it towards the case study of Israel, and take a kind of microscopic look at the Israeli judicial reforms, which have been, rocking the Israeli domestic scene for a number of years. And so this is kind of the topic that I want to dive into. And this is hopefully what I'm going to take you through for my 15 minutes. So I just want to firstly go through a bit of the introduction, the argument that I'll be putting through, touch a little bit on the theory and method, the theory that I'm kind of using here is law and political economy, to have a look at the idea of populism in a slightly different light. Then I want to kind of discuss the mainstream understanding of Israeli populism as against the judiciary, and then make an argument for, well, actually the Israeli populism and the judiciary are arguably one and the same thing before concluding. And I'm hoping as well in the conclusion that I'll then make ties to the excellent conceptual paper that was sent around as well. So just a bit of an overview of I guess the context of the judicial reform in Israel. In late 2022, the new so-called right-wing populist government, which has been called, one of the most right-wing governments in Israel history, won the November 2022 elections, and that was led by and still is led by the Likud party, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which also includes a coalition of ultra-Orthodox parties, Religious Zionist Alliance, and other small right-wing nativist parties. Even though obviously, many of us know that Israel has been at the forefront of a lot of global political news for a number of years for a number of different reasons, one of the main crises that were rocking Israel early on in this government's government program was that of judicial reform. One of the major agenda items of the new 2022 government was to reform the judiciary, and I'll talk in a moment exactly what that looks like. But the idea was basically to reduce judicial power as against the power of the executive government. And this kicked off a huge amount of domestic crises, polarization, protests, which rocked Israel for the better part of 2023. I think the interesting thing for me looking at this, and in my public law teaching, a lot of the case comparative work that I do actually looks at the Israeli judicial system and how it compares to our own system as well. I was always quite interested in the mainstream view of the judicial reform in Israel, because the typical narrative was that, look, we have one right-wing government, a very populist government on one hand, which was fighting against the judiciary as a kind of a section of the bureaucracy, who were embodying the liberal spirit, valiantly fighting the populists. And so my argument here was, well, if we take a view of populism outside of just the plain rhetoric, because I think certainly with the rhetorical theoretical framework looking at this, then yes, it fits really nicely into that narrative, where you have the Netanyahu government, who's very populist in their rhetoric, and then also the liberal judiciary, who talks about the rule of law and the separation of powers and all those fundamentals of liberal institutionalism. So yes, on the rhetoric level, that is the case. But if we look more to the material kind of content of the populism, through a law and political economy framework, we can actually see that these different branches aren't quite as distinct as this mainstream argument puts them. And most of this is because, as I'll talk about soon, is that the main content and material goals of the right-wing populist project in Israel is that of settler colonialism. So being able to take as much land as possible in the occupied Palestinian territories. And my argument as well, the judiciary has actually facilitated that process, and especially since 1967. So the strategy, the underlying strategies, the material kind of goals are relatively similar, even though the tactics may look superficially quite different in terms of the form. So just a little bit on the theory and method of a critical law and political economy framework. And I won't go into this in a huge amount of detail, but I guess two things that I really wanted to highlight in terms of what this framework tries to do is the first kind of political economy part of this framework kind of critiques the idea of separating society in different sectors. So critiques the idea of having, the politic and the economy and the judiciary in separate, isolated categories, and that actually all of these are kind of related together. And I think Professor Mátyás also kind of hinted at this as well, in that the judiciary is not sitting in a vacuum outside of society. They are not in their own little judicial pods, which don't have any kind of interaction with the broader social totality, but are very much influenced by the politics and the economy around them. And so specifically in the, the judicial side of things, they are influenced by the broader logic and structuring dynamics of society. So the law and political economy framework fundamentally critiques the idea of different silos and analytical categories that we try to understand society, and also the impacts of populism on society as well. And the law part of this law and political economy framework sees law as central to structuring the the inequalities that are inherent in the political economy that we see, whether that's like economic inequalities, whether that's racial, ethnic inequalities, whatever it might be, that are not naturally just there, but they're actually conceived, they're constructed and interpreted very specifically by different sections of the legal. I guess the legal sector, inclusive of the judiciary, to maintain those structuring logics. And so broadly, using a law and political economy framework, I kind of see the logical structurings of society then determines, well, what's the form of the judiciary? What does it take? And very similar, just like in our society as well, if we have, which we certainly do, have a capitalist logic that orientates, structures of our own society, then the judiciary is also orientated around those different logics of, permitting, privatization and profit maximization, whatever it might be. And similarly, if society is structured by like a settler colonial logic, then the legal form will reflect this kind of imperative as well. And this is exactly what I'm trying to argue in this particular case, looking at Israel and the Israeli judiciary. So the paper that I'm presenting here in this presentation is based on some initial and preliminary, although, relatively substantial, I like to think, doctrinal research of Israeli Supreme Court and High Court decisions, and particularly as they relate to the occupied Palestinian territories, especially concerning land. Because, what I was trying to capture through going through these databases was trying to find judgments that focus on, the West Bank, or as is described in by the judiciary, Judea and Samaria, the name that Israel gives to that territory, as well as land, Arab, Palestinian, using these kind of terms. And then using that kind of term search and collecting a whole number of judgments, I then, analyzed them and tried to kind of create a narrative to construct since 1967, which would give me an idea, well, what has been the position of the judiciary in this broader undercurrent populist project, which has really manifested and exploded in the last few years. So before I get there, I just want to then kind of go through, well, what is the actual mainstream narrative as it stands between Israeli populism and the judiciary? And we can hopefully understand both of these sectors before then I present my argument of, well, they're actually, very much joined, and there is not that nice, simple separation that a lot of liberal analysts might argue. So, and it's come up as well in the conference today that Israel is one of those countries that is recognized as having one of the strongest populist movements worldwide. And a lot of the populist research in Israel is very much focused around Netanyahu, not only because of Netanyahu's substantial political career and being able to kind of like, see his progression over time towards a more out and out right-wing populism, but also, of course, because he is the leader of the current Israeli government. And so he has been a major focus of a lot of studies of populism, but it's something that I'm kind of aligning a little bit this afternoon. Before Netanyahu's 2022 government, one of the major milestones in the Israeli populism project, which has been going on for a number of decades, was the passing of the nation-state law. This was a really important law, which I unfortunately go into huge amounts of detail here, but I talk about in the paper, which kind of helped to set out the context of the subsequent years of how the judiciary has approached questions of land and control across the occupied territories, as well as Israel proper. And this law, the nation state of the Jewish people, or also just known as the nation state law, was a really interesting constitutionalist document which basically restated the Declaration of Independence of Israel, but omitted the words democracy and equality, and asserted that the state of Israel, which is a political unit, was founded in the land of Israel, which is the more biblical landscape portrayed in Jewish sacred texts, which then helped kind of build the narrative of legitimizing the settlement operations in the occupied Palestinian territory. And this law, as I argue in the paper a little bit here, was also kind of the antecedent to the judicial reform, because a lot of the Israeli populists were really upset with the judiciary, which didn't certainly push back in some of the cases that had legitimized settlements in occupied Palestinian territories, although not entirely, as I argue in some detail in the paper. And so Netanyahu and the Israeli government portrayed the judiciary as hampering the electorate, hampering the will of the people. And so, as you can see here, I won't go into a lot of detail, but the judicial reform basically included these points on the slide, which is basically limiting the review, judicial review, limiting the ability of the courts to review basic laws, and basically trying to shift power from the judiciary back to the executive. So like I said, this produced a huge amount of social tension in Israel, and was argued as embodying Israeli populism, which the judiciary was totally against. Now, what I want to do for the last few minutes here was to kind of talk about my findings by going through the Israeli judicial rulings from the Supreme Court and the High Court of Justice, and particularly around three major points. So on land appropriation, secondly, the application of Israeli law to occupied Palestinian territories, and also the beneficiaries under the Hague regulations as they operated on the occupied Palestinian territories. So firstly, since 1967, the Supreme Court has been crucial to facilitating the seizure of land in the occupied Palestinian territories. And most of this was in interpreting the idea of state land in a certain way, which allowed the Israeli government to be able to seize it from Palestinians, because Palestinians couldn't definitively prove land ownership because there was a lack of a land register, as well as many other factors, and how the Israeli government categorized so-called vacant land in the occupied Palestinian territories as state land allowed that to be requisitioned by the government. And the High Court of Justice interpreted the domestic Israeli law in a way that permitted that. And the Supreme Court also constantly rejected the petitions that came to it, which basically asked the Supreme Court to rule settlements as being illegal under Article 49, subsection 6 of the Fourth Geneva Conventions, which prohibits the transfer of an occupier's population into occupied territories. And the court argued that the taking of land was necessary for the army and to maintain safety. And I also go into the paper about how interpreting the substance of Israeli laws has also allowed the government to take land from Palestinians in Israel proper. And just very brief in the last minute or so that I have, to also note that the Israeli judiciary has interpreted the law to allow some bureaucratic processes like the delivery of documents and the servings of subpoenas in the occupied territories to occur, which has legally erased the 1967 borders, which then has permitted a broader jurisdiction of the court into the occupied territories. And in doing so, they've also expanded the category of beneficiaries that should be protected around the laws of occupation. So previously, and in terms of legal custom, the laws of occupation are for the local population, which would normally be the Palestinians, occupied Palestinian territories. But the Israeli Supreme Court has expanded that category of beneficiaries to be settlers, as well as even tourists coming into the occupied Palestinian territories, so that the army has protected them in and against the Palestinians themselves. So, I mean, the last comment that I'll just make, and I really welcome any questions that you might have in terms of how this fits with the conceptual paper, I'm not too sure. I think, for me, there is the discourse of these institutions is around the rule of law, international law. There's this liberal and normative discourse to progress a populist-like project. And so I wonder, rather than exogenous capture, endogenous discourse. Maybe it's a case of endogenous capture, perhaps. But anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elliot. Now we invite Omer or Ihsan, or who's going to speak? Omer to return to the podium, and I'm not sure if you might find your own. You're technically able to find your own slides. So
hopefully.
Very good.
Yes. Right. So, thank you, Mark, for the introduction. I would be presenting this paper that was co-authored by Professor Ihsan Yilmaz and I, and the topic is Judicial Populism in Pakistan, Discourse and Authority in the Panama Papers Judgment. I am privileged to follow two very wonderful, excellent presentations given by Professor Mátyás and Elliot, but both those presentations were slightly different to what Professor Yilmaz and I did. So, of course, Professor Mátyás looked at the causes of judicial populism. Elliot looked at how the Israeli judiciary fits into or counters or competes with, tussles with the larger Israeli executive populist project. But what Professor Ihsan and I wanted to do was that we saw that there was this gap within literature, that there is talk of judicial populism, but there has been very few papers or research on how this populism or judicial populism shows in actual cases. So that's a gap that we try to fill by engaging with and reading and contextualizing these cases that are given out by the courts. And in this case, we are looking at the Panama Paper judgment in Pakistan. I've already mentioned in my last presentation, and it has been mentioned quite a few times, that populism has been traditionally associated with charismatic executives. And but there's been recent work with Yilmaz and others, my PhD included, which extends populism to areas such as judiciaries, bureaucracies. And of course, my colleagues who presented before me are doing the same as well. So the research problem or the research question is, how do courts deploy moral and populist discourse to legitimize exceptional authority? And our empirical focus is on the Pakistani Supreme Court judgments, the Panama Papers judgment, which were given in the April of 2017, and the second one was given in the July of 2017. One is a unanimous verdict. Actually, it's written wrong there with the majority, and one is a dissent. Key argument is the judiciary fashioned itself as the moral guardian and voice of the people amid institutional crisis. So the context, we talked about Pakistan for 45, 50 minutes. There's this chronic tension that exists within the country. It's a hybrid regime with military giving the most substance to this system of hybridity. But of course, judiciary has a place within that hybrid model as well. And it has historically sided with the military to justify coups through the state necessity or the law of necessity, which justifies coups by saying that they are necessary for the people of Pakistan, for the country in general. And that was the phase that we saw before 2007. That was the role of the Pakistani judiciary in general. But post 2007, after the lawyers' movement, courts began to act in the people's name, began to espouse and embody populist language. And there was public rhetoric, media coverage, moral sermons, even like public rallies, protests that happened in 2007 to restore the then Chief Justice of Pakistan, Justice Iftikhar Chaudhry, who was removed by General Pervez Musharraf. The Panama Papers, some 10 years later, is like a culmination of a judiciary trying to find its legitimacy, trying to find its power. And the context of that case is that it's a case that was filed by Mr. Imran Khan against the then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in 2016, because Nawaz Sharif's name came in the Panama leaks, and he accused him for money laundering, assets beyond means, offshore accounts, etc., etc. For this theory, we mix three key ideas or three theories on judicial populism or on institutional bureaucratic populism, given by Hilbank, Yilmaz and others, and Qureshi in 2024, in which mixes how Hilbank argues that courts perform proximity to the people, moralizing their authority. We've already talked about the concept paper. Unelected institutions claim to embody the people, espouse populism, and dissonant institutionalization by Qureshi says that courts try to fill moral void left by the compromised elites. Judicial populism, on the basis of these three theories, is defined by us as discursive performance by the courts that appeals to the people against the elite, moralizes legality, and legitimizes exceptional judicial intervention. The Pakistani case fuses both moral populism plus bureaucratic performance. Right. So our main methods is a qualitative content analysis of the two judgments that I just mentioned, the April and the July 2017 Panama paper judgment. And objective is to identify moral populist discursive patterns across 6 categories. And the categories are as follows: people versus elite, moral guardianship, divine legitimation, anti-technocratic moralism, cultural and literary moralization, and national redemption narrative. Data source is the full text of judgments, which is around 250 to 300 pages, which is quite long. And that is why I had to say that this paper is a work in progress. There needs to be a lot more engagement with those cases, which are, of course, quite lengthy. Analytical focus is how legal reasoning turns into moral performance and institutional legitimation. Right. So Judgment 1, Khosa's dissent, which sort of sets the tone for moral performance as espoused by the Pakistani Supreme Court. The main literary frame of that judgment, which is a 200-page judgment, was the Godfather. And from Godfather, there's a thing I wanted to say. Diane Keaton died 10 days ago, and my heart has been broken ever since. So I hope she rests in peace. Coming back to the topic, Godfather was the main frame that was used by Justice Khosa, and it was written on the first page, and sort of compared the Sharif family to the Corleone family, the ones that Francis Ford Coppola showed in his movie, the one Mario Puzo wrote in his book. And this was a movement of cultural moralization as such, where this Sharif family was culturally, by using a cultural reference, was maligned in public. Phrases such as "behind every great fortune there is a crime" were mentioned in the verdict. And the main idea that Justice Khosa tried to give was that he wanted to cleanse the fountainhead, as in he wanted to cut corruption at its uppermost stream, which was coming through the prime minister, and he positioned judiciary as a purifier of a corrupted system. There was quite a few mentions to these three codes: people versus elite binary, divine legitimation, and anti-technocratic moralism. Within divine legitimation, there was quite a bit of mention that how Nawaz Sharif was not Sadiq and Amin, which were the qualities of Prophet Muhammad, as mentioned in the Quran, and how Sharif has stopped being Sadiq and Amin, or honest and trustworthy. this sort of religious language was used with people and elite binary mixed with anti-technocratic moralism, condemnation of NAB, which is the National Accountability Bureau, and the FBR, which looks after the revenue part of the Pakistani governance. And the judiciary was presented as a sole moral sovereign that can actually make these corrupt politicians accountable. And this verdict, although it was a minority verdict, it was a dissent given in a verdict of 3-2 in April. It established a template for judicial populism as the rhetorical value. So some 3 months later, the same bench which gave a 3-2 verdict before, after witnessing more documents, disqualified Nawaz Sharif in a 5-0 judgment. And that judgment institutionalized moral populism. It extended Khosa's rhetoric and turned into institutional orders. Nawaz Sharif was disqualified for not following the Article 62 and 3 of the Pakistani Constitution, which said that the Pakistani executive should be honest and trustworthy. And they also mentioned that Nawaz Sharif has committed dishonesty before the nation, and as such should not be holding the office. There were themes of moral guardianship, national redemption narrative, where this case or this disqualification was presented as a redemptive movement for the country to move forward from its supposedly corrupt practices stemming from civilian politicians. The court further legitimized or augmented its authority by creating a joint investigation team against Nawaz Sharif, filing of references, putting in a monitoring judge, and there was a larger moral oversight embedded in bureaucracy through other parts of the bureaucracies as well as the judiciary itself. So it converted moral authority into structural power, right? So across both judgments, there was populism, or judicial discourse, or judicial populism discourse evolves from moral revelation to institutional activism. Khosa laid the grounds for a moral outrage against the Sharifs or against the civilian politicians, and the unanimous judgment of July 2017 embedded it through orders of JIT, disqualification itself. The main discursive mechanisms of moral binaries and divine appeals created symbolic legitimacy, bureaucratic enforcement of their morality converted rhetoric into governance, and the primary outcome was populist morality became a larger administrative architecture, and the judiciary was placed to act in the name of the people. The larger implication is that judicial populism here is cyclical. Moral discourse generates authority, and authority in return reproduces moral discourse, right? So the conclusion that Professor Ihsan and I reached were that Pakistan Supreme Court used moral and religious rhetoric to assert legitimacy, transformed from legal adjudicator or from neutral judges to the moral guardian or the protector of the general will of the people against a corrupt elite in the Sharifs, the civilian politicians at large. Judicial populism definitely exhumes or depicts endogenous discourse as identified in the concept paper. And the larger implications are that populism is not confined to the executives or charismatic leaders or populist political parties. Courts can also claim to speak for the people. Of course, there are many risks of that. There is constitutional overreach, the process of legal reasoning or legal neutrality is eroded. But yeah, it's Pakistan, and these things are happening there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Omer.
Thank you so much.
Our next speaker should be online.
I think they,
Yes.
No. I think we move on to Mohammed Shaban.
Okay, yes, Mohammed Shaban Rafi, are you online?
Yeah, we are online, and I don't know. We have to present. This is our turn because there's a presentation before us, or you want us to?
Yes, yes, we'd like you to. If so, we could move on to your presentation, which you've produced with Zafar Manzoor on competing populisms in Pakistan, and please share your presentation, and that would be great. Yeah, we can see that's all up on the screen. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zafar Manzoor, and with me is Professor Dr. Shaban. So today we are going to present this topic, Competing Populist Narratives in Pakistan, a discourse analysis of politicians, digital citizens, and bureaucratic counter-narratives. I will present the introduction and methods part, and Dr. Shaban will present the results part. So Pakistan's multi-party democracy operates under a persistent military influence that shapes its political narratives. So we explore how anti-military populism emerges online, where politicians challenge power, and how this anti-military populism is received by digital users, and how military counter it in their communication. So for this purpose, our research is guided by the following key questions. The next slide, please. So the first question is, what are the discursive strategies of anti-military populism that Pakistani politicians employ on X? The second question is that how do digital citizens construct their responses to anti-military populism on X? And the third question is, how does the Pakistani military configure counter anti-military narratives in its official communication on the ISPR website? To answer these questions, we purposefully sampled 6 Pakistani politicians from 3 major political parties, PMLN, PTI, and PPP. From PMLN, Shahbaz Sharif and Maryam Nawaz, Imran Khan and Ali Muhammad Khan from PTI, and Bilawal Bhutto Zardari and Asfa Bhutto Zardari from PPP. Our selection criteria was based on A, follower counts on X, and B, active participation in the 2024 election campaign during the data collection period. So the data spans from August 9, 2023 to February 9, 2023. This period was caretaker setup was placed in Pakistan, and all these political parties were running for election. So the data set comprises of 690 X posts and 55,227 comments from these sampled politicians. So the official military X account did not post during this period. However, we collected 146 ISPR press releases from its website to analyze the military's reaction to populist narratives. And our analysis drew on Lackler's discourse theory of populism and Van Dijk's ideological scale. So we also employed thematic analysis, and to guide our coding process, we systematically followed thematic analysis. Now I request Professor Dr. Shaban Rafi to please share the results and key findings of our study. Thank you.
Thank you, Zafar, for introducing me and calling on me for the presentation. I think our talk is not very relevant to what has already been presented on the judicial populism, but there are certain aspects which may sit well with judicial populism that has been presented by Mátyás and Elliot and Omer. And I I would like to highlight that this paper is more of a scientific paper where we have based our finding on data. So most of our findings are data driven, and we have pulled out few data segments to support our findings. So before I begin, I just want to reiterate, we have utilized the concept of populism as a discursive construction, a genre of communication, because Zafar and I are linguists, so we will relate language and critical linguistics as the aspects of populism in Pakistan. So the populist discourse is created not just who speak, but their positionality and the way they structure particular meanings, the social and economic positions of populists, although are not different from the forces or system or social order my colleagues have highlighted as a hybrid regime or the regime. But I personally think this is more as a new normal in Pakistan, which we call military establishment. So, but how they create their subjective position in a logic of equivalence that resonate among digital citizens in the transnational spaces to oppose bureaucratic system that establish the sense of stability and meanings. So we found these three main discursive practices in the dataset as an answer to our first question. So Pakistani populist politicians utilize various linguistic markers, including metaphors, signifiers, binaries, to construct antagonistic military discourse. They combine their grievances through a logic of equivalence to construct the negative military versus positive them and the people. The categories emerge like military as a usurper of civilian rule, as an agent of oppression and injustice, and obstacle injustice. So these are the aspects that I would like to relate with my colleague Mátyás and Elliot and Omer, like how military in a way influenced the judicial system in Pakistan. So though we haven't dealt with this topic independently, but it emerged. These are the examples that we have drawn from the data sets. You could notice from the very first example, IK employed empty signifier like treason, foreign conspiracy, and regime change to communicate diverse grievances, including political betrayal, external interference, and national humiliation. And this was posted by IK, and the date is given along with his signature. The passive construction, the second example, the passive construction sham case is created to disqualify a sitting prime minister, identifies the us versus them dichotomy by depicting judicial victimization as a covert military operation. Similarly, as agent of oppression and injustice, we have brought few data segments like MN Mariam Nawaz put up a signifier party to construct a collective identity of resilience in the face of oppression, in a way turning suffering into moral superiority. So this is what is the point. So there is not one particular politician we can label him as a populist, but they have been populist in different discourses. When they were out of government, their communication was very much similar to a populist discourse. However, when they joined the government, their disposition changed their communication patterns. So this is a very relevant example that we share, obstacle to justice. So AB utilized floating signifiers like admitted and under pressure to highlight obstacles to justice under military cautions. Similarly, SS, which is Shahbaz Sharif, employed a floating signifier verdict to signify predetermined outcome under authoritarian control. His actual tweet is given in 3. So as far as our answer to the second question is concerned, so there are 3 discursive strategies which emerged, and our second research question is primarily on how do digital citizens construct their responses to anti-military populism on X. So the discursive strategies populist leaders create are recycled and multiplied through the surplus meanings. Once again, digital citizens, they add their own meaning to the discursive practices which are carried out by populist leaders in Pakistan. So you might want to say they add their own spices while they are communicating in the digital spaces. So eventually the antagonistic discourse populists create further perpetuate extreme ideologies among populists. Their linguistic choices reflect these ideologies. We'll talk about that. So the military as conspiratorial. So when we analyze the data of digital citizens, we came with these discursive categories that they recurrently utilize in their communication. A respondent put the term corrupt, mafia, facilitator in a logic of equivalence to highlight military as conspiratorial. Similarly, another said respondent uses the phrase as shameless traitors as a discursive move that raises the military institution legitimacy, frames it as partisan conspirators. So this is a very brave of, I should say, digital citizens who are very blunt and straightforward in communicating against military and expressing anti-military rhetorics. So the last category that was obstacle to justice. So they employed multiple phrases like there is no justice in Pakistan. You can only need to be in power or to be rich to portray the judiciary as a captured institution favoring elite. So these phrases put the military and judiciary in a chain of equivalence to communicate antagonistic framings. And they also utilize multiple linguistic forms. And the last category which emerged in the data of digital citizens in transnational spaces, that is a hatred towards military. They have expressed their sentiments in different forms. So the illustration, this illustration says that hate will carry forward to my generation, manifest antagonism into future constructings, resentment as a generational legacy. So if you want to know more about how hate is perpetuating extreme ideologies among digital citizens, we would like to recommend this paper that we wrote some time ago on the role of political hate speech in promoting extreme ideologies and manipulating public discourse for social approval in Pakistan. So the last discursive, discourse that we found in the communication of ISPR, which is public wing of military. This is the answer to our last question. So 3 discursive categories emerge: guardians of national unity, protector of peace and security, symbol of sacrifices and collective resolve. These 3 discursive strategies utilized by ISPR demonstrate the social order that military established creates to seek people consent, not speaking of competing populist narrative. These strategies in many ways reinforce the structure of power and hegemony or the social order that they eventually create to seek consent from like-minded or from internally the people. So the guardian of national unity, these are some discursive strategies that I found very much similar to Omer's first presentation, where he has talked about unity, identity in the communication of military press releases. So I want to just quickly pass through and then move on to the discussion about protector of peace and security and symbol of sacrifices and collective resolve. So where we are, ladies and gentlemen, finding of this study indicates that Pakistan is a unique case compared to countries where populism is deployed as a discursive strategy to mobilize populace, support, while antagonizing the military. The linguistic structure of military discourse reinforces the structure that is challenged by populist leaders. The positionality and the context of populist define or in a way control their communication, like albeit from pro to military and vice versa. You might want to find similar patterns in the communication of populist leaders like Imran Khan. When he was in a government, his communication patterns were very much different than when he got to be outside the government. So we would like to recommend you to read this paper to know more about how politicians oscillates their communication in different positionalities and in different discourses. So the early presentation by scholars from various parts of the world, of course, foreground, the focus of populist leaders' communication has largely been on migration, religion, nationalism, rival political parties. The findings of our study reflect the historical evolution of meaningful. For instance, anti-military rhetoric was once constructed as an act of anti-nationalism within dominant political discourse. So over the period of a time, however, the discursive framing of anti-military speech has become increasingly normalized, repositioning such rhetoric as a legitimate form of democratic expression rather than as a threat to national integrity. So although the military contests these populist rhetorics with a discursive construction of sacrifice, unity, nationalism, identity, and the data from digital citizens demonstrate that their traditional metaphor failed to seek attention and eventually evoke emotions as they used to be. There was a time when the nation was along with the army, as Faiza presented in the very first panel and talked about that, how people used to idealize them with the military. But those sentiments appears to us are fading in the communication of digital citizens. Instead, our study demonstrates that these discursive strategies reinforce at the social order that the military established creates to seek consent from people. So despite power and control on media, for the dissemination of pro-military discourse by ISPR, populist anti-military discourse resonate well among digital citizens. Maybe because ISPR is not on social media. Oh, we think that it's better for them not to be on social media because they cannot pull out sport like populist leaders. So it is perhaps populist communication is quite successful in establishing the shifting dichotomy of us, the people, versus them, the military elites or military establishment. So our final thoughts, populism is not a pathology. It is a discursive political approach to antagonize the military establishment in a way to the social order. This antagonism occurs because populists are victimized and unable to attain identity, therefore their interests. So social media networking sites, particularly X, popularly known as a Twitter, has provided a fertile space to populist leaders and their like-minded followers to engage in antagonistic communication, mostly through the logic of equivalence and the dichotomy of good us and bad them to challenge the social order. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to us. You can scan this QR code to know more about us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We now have opportunity for some questions. If Mátyás is still online as well. Yeah, very good. So are there any questions to our panelists relating to the issues which they've raised raging across Hungary and Israel and Pakistan? Are there any questions? Yes.
Very small question. Very small question. The televising of court decisions, which now happens more in Australia and the US than it used to. Has this happened in either Hungary or Pakistan?
Mátyás, would you like to start?
Yes. I wrote about that in my one of my previous work, that there is a very strong impact on a court's behavior when television cameras are present. And there are some papers from India and from the US that in the US, one researcher conducted research, and she showed convincingly that in cases where there were great media attention, the decision was different from cases where media were not present. And I have some cases from Hungary when the media attention influenced the judgment. I could compare cases with media attention and without media attention, and it can be detected that there is a significant difference in the sentencing or the decision when cameras are present, because the judges tend to act to the cameras and tend to align their decision to the presumed public mood. So yes, the media has a great impact on judicial behavior.
Are there any comments relating to Pakistan and the judicial, televisation?
Yeah, well, Omer is also sitting, and I'm sure he's familiar about the media role in Pakistan. Media plays a very important role, but when such mass protests happen against military establishment or against certain decisions which are strategic, what mostly happens, the mainstream media, that is mostly, does not cover those aspects. But social media, on the other hand, is playing a very crucial role as a voice of youth, we call it a digital citizens, who express freely about this. So in many ways, social media is influencing the mainstream media in Pakistani discourse. So just to highlight, even if mainstream media wants its voice should reach out to a mass level, so the mainstream media, TV channels, they put their news on social media like YouTube or Facebook or Twitter to just spread their voice, because people stop watching mainstream media or stop reading newspaper because they are influenced, and they promote ideology which is closer to either military establishment, or they have ideology which may not, or may, in many ways, restrict them to speak so boldly in front of a TV screen. So for these reasons, I don't know if I've been able to answer the question of my colleague.
No, it's fine. It's fine. In Australia, the third media, web coverage of either the judgments or the trials have been used recently. A group of Zionists have undertaken lawfare against several Sydney University and Macquarie academics and several journalists. And the federal court, I'm not sure whether the whole proceedings are on the web or just the judgments. I think in some cases the proceedings are on the web. So that is the in-between media. And as we know, that's then picked up by both social media and mainstream media for their little grabs. Thank you.
I don't know if, Elliot, you have any response, okay? Or Omer, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just on the question of if the judicial cases are televised live on television in Pakistan, I've seen this recent trend. I think from the last 2-3 years, we've been seeing this broadcast of cases directly from the Supreme Court, especially not in the lower courts. I haven't seen many cases that have been broadcasted from the High Court or the lower court, but the cases that are pretty famous or politically relevant, constitutional mainly, against civilian politicians, their political logos, those kind of cases are shown from recent memory. I can say that they were broadcasted on television, but these cases generally, even if they're shown on media or not, they become a thing. They are there in the newspapers, on social media. Almost every person who is politically aware is talking about these cases. So the larger point being, the judiciary as a political actor holds such a big, prominent place within Pakistan that when it intertwines with the executive or with another institution, it becomes a news, and it becomes a big news.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments for our panelists? I just have one question, just thinking about one of the main ways in which you might say populist voices always want to see themselves against the elite, and there are a few, and within our society, judges can be seen as the most elite of the elite. How Mátyás, do judges overcome the perception that they're kind of they're not representing the people, but representing the elite?
It's a very good question. I was thinking about it, and so examining the behavior of Hungarian judges, I did not find this anti-elitist discourse. The populism of Hungarian judges reflects in other discursive features. The main feature of the populism of Hungarian judges manifested in the so-called direct connection with the people. So they do not take an anti-elitist rhetoric, the corrupt elite and versus the pure people, but they try to play to the public mood, to identify themselves as one of the citizens, but they do not put emphasis in this anti-elitist rhetoric, because, as you mentioned, they are part of the elite. So it would be very strange if they take anti-elitist rhetoric. But of course, I know that, for example, the case of Trump, he is from the elite and he used anti-elitist rhetoric. It's not a problem for him. But in case of the Hungarian judges, they put the emphasis in the direct connection with the people and not to the anti-elitist rhetoric. They use the tabloid language of the tabloids, as I mentioned. They align their decision to the public mood, to the public opinion, and they avoid this anti-elitist discourse.
Thank you. Elliot, do you have any comments in relation to Israel on that?
Thank you very much for the question. I mean, just briefly, I mean, it's quite interesting how the judiciary try to overcome this populist voices positioning, I guess, their campaign against the elite, because I mean, the Israeli judiciary have been in the crosshairs of the populist right in Israel about embodying the elite and subverting, democracy by stopping the government's agenda. And I mean, at the rhetorical level, and I haven't looked at this in great detail in terms of what the judges say outside of the courts themselves, but there is certainly, push back, and the judges do generally seem in their public statements and biographies and such that I've had a chance to look at, that they position themselves very much in the rule of law and other kind of liberal rhetoric and discourse. But it's also interesting that in the judgments themselves, they identify the purposes of the court being within the I guess central kind of purpose of the Israeli state, as they call it. So, I mean, in one of the judgments that I looked at, the judges there, clearly stated that the primary value of the Israeli state is about promoting Jewish settlement in the occupied territories, and so this is why we are ruling this way, which is very much within that populist rhetoric. So you still see elements of this populist rhetoric actually reproduced in the judgments in slightly different form and a different kind of language. And so I think it's quite interesting. There's a kind of dichotomy between, like, I guess, the public facing and then the rulings themselves.
Thank you. And any commentary on that relating to Pakistan? Omer, do you want to?
About
the issue that the judges are part of the elite, but also often seen to be, defending, how do they become part of the people at the same time as part of the elite as well, and overcome this dilemma?
I think what has served, so the Pakistani Supreme Court especially, I think there are 14, 15 judges, most of them trained at Oxford, Harvard, places like this, extremely elitist, extremely wealthy mostly. But what changed for the Pakistani Supreme Court was the lawyers' movement of 2007, which was a movement to restore the then Chief Justice of Pakistan, Chaudhry Iftikhar, who was removed by a military dictator, General Musharraf. So when he removed Iftikhar Chaudhry, there was a huge movement by the lawyers to restore him, and that connected the army, which is elitist, to the people. And since this 2007 onwards, we have seen this shift of the Pakistani Supreme Court, especially, to embodying the will of the people, or saying that they represent the will of the people. So I think the main connection or the main change came after 2007, and it has sort of amplified, augmented ever since, through so many other things. There's activism, there is populism, all mixed. The judiciary is there to, they're collecting money to build a dam in Pakistan, for example. They're raiding hospitals. So they do connect with the people in that way by these very showpiece acts, and perhaps that also brings them closer to the people as well.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? Yes.
Yes, there is one question from Zoom.
Yes.
From Zafar Mansour. For Omer, what are the long-term implications of judicial populism for the aspirations of powers and the rule of law in developing democracy? implications?
I think from the top of my head, I can perhaps say that the long-term implication can be that at least in the context of Pakistan, there is very little separation of power in the first place. It's all a mess. If I think that's the best way to describe it. But not having judiciary as a check on the executive and it being political itself, of course, I think dilutes the essence of democracy by removing that structural power that judiciary holds. So instead of providing a check and balance, it's sort of competing with civilian politicians or let's say other institutions such as the military. Of course, it creates more fragmentation, and Pakistan especially is a very, very fragmented polity with quite a few institutions and civilian politicians fighting with each other. So as I see it, it would lead to more fragmentation, more erosion of democracy, and on a very practical level, I think we'd see more disqualifications, like something that I'm not a big fan of at all, because I've thought or I think that democracy in Pakistan should be given a chance in a way that even if it's bad or not doing well, this completion of cycles of 5 year would ultimately lead to a better place. But judiciary and the military steps in, which of course doesn't allow civilian politicians or the civilian democracy to develop. So yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? If not, I'll hand over to Nick to conclude the event. And thank you very much again to all our panelists as well.